In this lesson, we'll talk a little bit about painting in Mudbox. So we talked about sculpting. Now let's talk about painting textures for our models. And there are a couple of ways that we can paint textures for our models. One of the ways is to have UVs laid out for our mesh and to create flat texture maps that we can paint here and export into other applications. Another method is to actually use PTEX to create textures, and we won't need UVs at all, and we can output those, something like RenderMan, and it'll understand those and be able to render those. Now we're not going to talk too much about PTEX, but the tools that we talk about, the paintbrush and all the painting tools, are going to apply just the same as working with a UV model. So in this case, where we're going to be working with UVs, we'll talk about PTEX in a later course. But let's say that we have our model now. We've got UVs on our model. This model is set up with a number of UV tiles here, okay, which we can see in our UV view. And so we want to start painting. Now the first thing we want to do is to have a material on our model. So the paint that we create is going to be sort of tied to the material that we have. So if you have two objects with the same material and you don't want them to have the same texture map, you want to avoid that. So we'll go ahead and just right click, and we want to assign a new material. Okay, we can also go up to create and create a material and just create a Mudbox material, or we can go here and assign new material, and then we can choose what kind of material. We'll just add a simple Mudbox material. It's going to bring up our material window here, and we'll be able to choose some of the different aspects of our material, the diffuse color and so forth. We're not going to really worry too much about the material settings, but you can go in and play with those, the glossiness, the incandescence, and you can click on these to change the color. We're going to be creating that color within our texture map for the most part, and so we're not going to worry too much about that, but there are a number of settings in here. Okay, and so you can see over in our objects list, we have a new material here that's assigned to this. Now let's go over to layers. Now we want to choose paint layers, and right now we don't have any paint layers, so we don't have any paint on our model. So what we want to do is to create a paint layer. Now there are a number of ways that we can do this. We can go here and create a new paint layer. Okay, we can go up here, create new layer, or if we just click on the paintbrush in our paint tools tray and try to paint on our model, it's going to realize we don't have a paint layer to actually paint on, so it's going to prompt us to create a new paint layer. So we'll go ahead and name this something. Let's call this creature color. We can choose a size for our texture, okay, up to 4K. We can choose the file format that we want to save this as, okay, so we can choose different file formats, and then we can also choose what channel this is actually going to be associated with. So if we're going to have this be the color, we would associate it with the diffuse, but we could also paint the specular, we could paint the glossiness, we could paint incandescence, we can even paint opacity. If we have something that's, you know, semi-transparent, we could paint that. We could have vector displacement map, channel. We could have bump, normal, reflection mask. So there are a number of different channels that we can create. This one happens to be the color, so we'll choose diffuse, and we'll say OK to that. So it's going to create our new paint layer, which you can see here, and it's inside this diffuse group, which we can open and close. If we wanted to create a new layer, go to new layer, and we could call this something like bump. Choose the size and the format, and then we can change this to bump map. Say OK to that. That'll create a new paint layer within this bump map. Now we can have multiple layers within this diffuse and bump, let's say. So let's go to our diffuse layer. We want to have the layer selected that we're going to be painting on, and now we'll use our painting tool. So in this case, we'll just select our paintbrush, and the same thing applies with the paintbrush as we saw with the sculpt. If I hit B, I can change the brush size. If I hit M, I can change the strength. Okay, and we also have an option for color. So if I come over here to the properties, I can select a particular color. If I want to get kind of an orange color, maybe a yellow, you know, gold, something like that, say OK to that. And now we can start painting on our model in our 3D view. And this is actually going to be located here in our particular paint layer. So if I come in here and start to paint through this, you can see it's just kind of a large stroke here. Okay, come in and paint this through. We can also use symmetry. So if we turn on symmetry in the X, we can actually paint both sides of this at the same time, which makes our work a little bit easier. Okay, and come in here. We can also use stamps to paint. So if we have a particular stamp that we want to use here, we can select our stamp, maybe turn on randomize, maybe change the color a bit, make it a bit darker and saturated. We can come in here and you can see how we can start to break that up by using that stamp. Okay, so we can come in here and start to break up that color. You choose a lighter color here. Come in and you just start to layer things on top of each other to get that base coat. Okay, and you can see I'm still using that stamp with the symmetry on with that particular size and strength. Again, you can choose a different fall off if you want to. A lot of the same options are here. Stamp spacing as well. You can see the fall off located here, which you can change. Okay, you can sample colors using the eyedropper. So I can sample that color from around the model. Okay, so you can see how I can do that. I can also hit I to sample a color off of there. We can use the airbrush, draw with a pencil. So there are a number of different options in here. Come in and erase the paint out of our paint layer. Okay, there's a tool called the dry brush, which will allow us, if we come in here and get kind of a, let's get an orange, it will allow us to paint, and let me go ahead and turn the stamp off. It will allow us to paint on the tops. So we can kind of paint on the upper part in some of these areas. Okay. We can also dodge and burn, change the contrast, the sponge to take out some of the saturation. We can change the hue. So here we can change the hue. Here we can actually shift the hue based on this angle. So I could come in here and it wouldn't change any of the detail. It would just shift the hue of whatever it is I'm painting based on the angle that I have selected there around the. So think of that as going around the color wheel. You can see the texture that we're painting. If we go into our UV view, you can see the flattened texture. In this case, it's multiple texture files because we're working with multiple tiles. You can see how that detail is reflected in there. We can also adjust our paint layer. So if I right click on this paint layer and go down to adjust color, and I can change the hue of the entire paint layer, saturation and value of that. Okay. If we want to get rid of a paint layer, we can right click on this and we have options for deleting that layer. We can also duplicate it to use it somewhere else. We can click and drag it to other groupings. Okay. If we want to just see that particular layer, we can solo that particular layer. Okay. We can unsolo. So if we just want to look at a particular layer, we can also import existing textures by going to import layer. And that will allow us to import existing textures onto a paint layer. Now if we want to create a new layer, let's create a new diffuse layer, and just so we can see what that looks like. And so now we have a new layer located up here. So here we have the color that we painted. Here's our new layer, which we can start to add some different colors to. So if we wanted to get something a bit brighter and we wanted to come in here, and let me turn off the stamp, and we wanted to kind of paint a design in here. Okay, I have to paint some markings on the shell or something like that. Okay, wanted to come in and do that. Now we have that on a separate layer, so I can modify that. I can take it off if I don't want it, or I can change the strength. So you can see I don't want it to show as much. I can take that down. We can also use blend modes. So if I go up to here, you can see that all of these blend modes are familiar to you. If you've used something like Photoshop, you've seen these before. And so we can start to change the blend mode along with the strength to get a particular look. So there's a lot of flexibility in the painting workflow that's available to us here in Mudbox because we can separate things out based on the different paint layers that we want. We can turn things off and on, and then we can have different layers associated with different things like bump and the diffuse and things like that. Okay, so looking at this, you can see how you can really get a lot of work done here. You also have the ability to paint layer masks to show through different areas of the paint layers and not show different areas. And so that is something that's available to you as well, and something we'll cover in a later course. Okay, so here in Layers under Paint, you can come and find all of your options. You can merge the layers together, import layers, export layers. There's a lot of different options in here for dealing with these layers. Just think about them as texture maps, and you can decide whether you want to deal with these and squish them all together to be one diffuse map, or work with these as separate layers. Okay, and so just remember, you want to be on the layer that you are wanting to paint on. You want to have that selected while you're painting. Okay, if you wanted to paint on the bump, you'd go and select the bump map and do your painting there. And then you can use all of your painting tools here located in your Paint Tools tray. So it's just a quick overview of painting. Have a little fun and play around with the painting tools, creating new paint layers, and try layering a few paint layers on top of one another using some of the blend modes that you have there, and see what kind of results that you can get. All right. In the next lesson, we will talk a little bit about the display of our models. So we'll talk about some of the on-target presentation filters that we can use, and a little bit about lighting. So we'll go ahead and do that next.